Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbidi Bobbidi Books. My name is Ellie and today I'm going to be doing a spoiler-filled review for Deadhouse Gates by Steven Erikson. So Deadhouse Gates is of course book 2 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson, which is a hugely expansive military adult fantasy series, and I have been getting into it this year. I read the first book, Gardens of the Moon, in January, and then I've just finished Deadhouse Gates. I'm very slowly working my way through them because they are very chunky books and they are very, very intense. So I've been spacing them out quite a lot and that's working quite well for me, but I am enjoying the series so far. So today I thought I would film a spoiler-filled review for this second book because as the series goes on, I feel like it's going to get more and more difficult to discuss the stories without going into spoilers. So if you haven't read the second book yet, please click off and come back after you've read it because I will be discussing spoilers in this video. I did film a review video for Gardens of the Moon and that one is actually spoiler-free. So if you'd like to hear my thoughts on the first book, if you're thinking about getting into the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, I will have that video linked down below for you. But with that caveat aside, I'm going to just jump straight into the review. You have been warned, there will be spoilers. So I feel like the first thing that I need to say is, whoa, this book is so dark and intense. My goodness, that's part of the reason why it took me months to get through this book, because it is so heavy on my heart. It really truly is one of the most bleak stories that I've ever read and has some of the most upsetting scenes and themes in it. So I just want to say that up front, this is a very heavy book. Steven Erikson does not shy away from the absolute atrocities and brutality of war, and it is all very much on the page. So please be warned before you go into this one. The first book, Gardens of the Moon, is also pretty dark, but this one steps it up to a whole new level. So I just want to say that for you. Although I guess if you're here, you probably have already read the book, so you already know how dark it is because this is a spoiler-filled review, but I just wanted to say that right up front. Oh my goodness, I was really shocked by how dark this book is. The next thing that I want to say up front is I feel like a lot of people have asked me, is Deadhouse Gates as confusing as Gardens of the Moon? And my answer to that question is yes and no. So yes, it is confusing because Steven Erikson continues to, throw new characters, new places, new fantasy races, new concepts at you as you read through these stories. That's just his style of writing, and he throws you very much right into the action and doesn't give you much exposition or explanation along the way. So there is still that within this second book, so you are still having to kind of roll with things and just trust that it's all going to start coming together at the end. But I do also feel like this second book is easier to follow than the first book because, for me anyway, it felt a little bit clearer to see where our characters were going and what the direction of the story was. Whereas I feel like in Gardens of the Moon, it was really choppy and all over the place and it wasn't very clear what we were doing or where we were going. Whereas in this book, we've got separate groups of characters and it's pretty clear what their motives are and the reasons why they're doing what they're doing. And so for that reason, I felt like it was easier to kind of follow the plot from that perspective, if that makes sense. So the next thing that I want to talk about in this review is the setting, because for me, the setting was one of the standout things in this book, and it is so different to the first book, Gardens of the Moon. So Gardens of the Moon primarily takes place on the continent of Genebakis, whereas in Deadhouse Gates, it takes place on the continent of 7 cities. So we're switching it up to an entirely new location. And it feels so different because the 7 cities is a desert type continent. So it has that really harsh, brutal setting, which really works well with the brutality of the story as well. It provides the perfect backdrop to this war story. And yeah, so we had loads of descriptions of things like sandstorms and the intense high temperatures. And there were survival elements as well with the lack of water. And also insects were a really big deal in this book and they were truly horrible, but added so much to the general feel and atmosphere of this book. So we had these swarms of blood flies and flies, which to me symbolize kind of death and decay, don't they? And then we also had all of these cape moths and these butterflies, and they sort of to me symbolize transformation and rebirth, don't they? Which again is obviously a big theme within Deadhouse Gates. So I really loved how Stephen Erikson used the setting and the environment to also reflect some of the themes of the story itself. So yeah, I absolutely loved the setting, and I just found it so immersive and so brutal. And I also just really loved the idea of the Seven Cities continent. We have this place where civilizations have built on top of civilizations. So when one crumbles, a new one is built right on top of the ruins of the old cities and the old civilizations. So we have this kind of layered landscape, and we have this land which is steeped in all of this really brutal history. I feel like I'm saying brutal a lot, but that is a big theme within this book. So yeah, I love the idea that we have these kind of layers and these civilizations built on top of civilizations. And there's actually a quote that I wanted to read you from the book because I feel like it sums up the setting really well. So it says, Seven Cities was an ancient civilization steeped in the power of antiquity, where ascendants once walked on every trader track, every footpath, every lost road between forgotten places. It was said that the sands hoarded power within their susurrating currents, that every stone had soaked up sorcery like blood, and that beneath every city lay the ruins of countless other cities, older cities, cities that went back to the first empire itself. It was said each city rose on the backs of ghosts, the substance of spirits thick like layers of crushed bone. So just this idea of this place that is so steeped in history and has seen rise and fall of so many civilizations. I just love that idea. And also the fact that when we have this sort of whirlwind and when these winds come in, it reveals hidden layers and hidden depths to the environment. So you're kind of peeling back the layers and you're kind of uncovering these civilizations below. And I just thought that was a really cool concept. And, you know, I've heard Stephen Erikson in interviews saying that he has a keen interest in archaeology. And I feel like that really reflects in this book and in this setting in particular, because, you know, there's lots of descriptions of, you know, uncovering these ruins of previous civilizations and that kind of history that he has in the back of his mind woven throughout the landscape in this book. And I just think it's really cool, and it makes me want to learn more and more about previous generations and the history and how, you know, what's happened previously is affecting what is happening now. Okay, so let's jump into the prologue. So my goodness, this book starts with such a dark and bleak prologue. It really grips you by the throat and kind of sets the tone for what to expect for this book going forwards. I was really shocked actually. It reads more like horror than fantasy, and it is just so dark, and also throws some really wild concepts at you right from the get-go. So yeah, I was kind of hooked and drawn right in. So yeah, we find out that Perrin's sister Tavor is the new adjunct, and she is leading this culling of the noble houses, including her very own 15-year-old sister Felisin, who she sends off into slavery and ships to these mines where they're mining this ore which nullifies magic, as far as I'm aware. But my goodness, what a betrayal for poor Felisin. So her sister literally sends her off, and I'm sure Tavor has her reasons for sending Felisin off to the mines, but they must have been pretty desperate reasons, because honestly, the things that Felisin has to face, you know, to survive was one of the most difficult things to read in this book. But anyway, we're going to talk more about Felisin in a little bit. But yeah, so she gets sent off to the mines. We meet some other characters as well. So there is also Heboric and Baudin, who are also slaves going to the mines. And of course, we have that really shocking scene where Baudin literally saws off the head of that noblewoman, that old lady, to like give the people what they want, because the people are like amassing around these slaves as they're trying to go towards the ships, and they're like really full of like bloodlust. And oh my gosh, that was just such a brutal moment right on the page there, right from the prologue. So my goodness, that was so disturbing and graphic and gross. We also have that like priest who turns into like flies. I don't know what was going on with all of that, but it was really cool. And yeah, like I say, really sets the scene for this story. Okay, so the way that I kind of understand and think about this book is by splitting it into 4 different groups of characters and 4 different locations. So I feel like that's going to be the easiest way to talk about this book. So I'm going to divide it into those 4 groups. So the first group that I want to talk about is Felisin and Heboric and Baudin. And I feel like the main focus for me is going to be on the character of Felisin, because she was just a character that I felt so bad for. And I know that Felisin is a very divisive character, because, you know, I've heard people talking about this book and a lot of people really don't like Felisin, and I know where they're coming from, because she does say and do some despicable things, but I personally just feel like it's a really accurate portrayal of someone who has been through severe trauma, who is just trying to survive. And she's only 15, and regardless, even if she wasn't 15, even if she was a lot older, I still feel like it's an accurate depiction of what people are like when they are struggling. So bearing in mind that she has been sold into slavery, prior to that she was a noble woman who had a lot of comforts in her life. Now she is a slave, and the only way that she knows how to survive and to make her circumstances a little bit better for herself is to sell her body, which is just so sad that she feels like she has to do that. And, you know, it's a way for her to try and take a little bit of control. She feels like by doing this, she can make her situation a bit better, but she can also try to help her friends out. So she does it for, you know, for her friends, particularly Heboric, who she knows wouldn't survive the harsh conditions of the mines. So he was going to be sent off to do this really heavy duty work, and she, you know, uses her body to try and win favors from her pimp, essentially, who makes sure that Heboric, you know, has lighter work and is more likely to survive. So she's doing it to try and improve, you know, their situations in a very desperate time. And she also becomes dependent on alcohol and drugs. She's taking these substances to numb herself to what is happening to her, and she becomes reliant on it. And, you know, she has this addiction, and she is going to this pimp-like character. What's his name? Benneth, that's his name. So she you know, becomes reliant on Benneth, and Benneth is very manipulative towards her. You see him picking away at her self-esteem and always kind of putting her down, and sort of like just, you know, just making her become a shell. And it's really, really sad to watch. And, you know, she's just desperate. She's clinging on. And, you know, he then gives her these little scraps, you know, these things that he's doing to help her. And she clings on to that, and then, you know, builds this kind of narrative in her head that he actually cares for her, when it's really obvious to us as a reader that he just doesn't, and he's using her, and it's really, really horrific. So yeah, so she is going through all of this. And then, of course, when they eventually break out of the mines, firstly, she is horribly disfigured by those blood flies that sort of crawl under her skin. Oh my gosh, that sounded absolutely awful. So, you know, the one thing that she has left, the one thing that she has been using to survive is her looks, and to use her body in that way. And then she ends up getting disfigured, so she doesn't even have that. And then she is suffering from withdrawal from these drugs, because she was, you know, she was using drugs to cope. And now she's out in the desert, no food, no water, no drugs, and she is suffering from withdrawal. So it's understandable that she lashes out to the people around her and to the people who are closest to her, because she has zero trust or faith in anyone. She is, you know, suffering from withdrawal, and hurt people. That's just what people do. And so I feel like it's a very brutal and a very honest look at what someone who's been through all that might be like. And so for that, I kind of appreciate the direction that Steven Erikson took with Felisin. And I understand that some of the things that she says and the things that she does, you know, is vile. She doesn't treat the people around her well at all, but I also just feel like that's because she is hurting so much deep inside, and it is so tragic. So yes, that was Felisin. That's my kind of thoughts and feelings about her. I will defend her, and I know that a lot of people don't, so but that's just my personal take. I just felt so sorry for her. And we then had that really tragic moment as well when she cradled Baudin's head. So he ends up dying, and there was this really sad moment where she kind of cradles his head, and she kind of loses this armor that she's built up around herself, and you see that she is just a child. And that was just absolutely heartbreaking, that scene, you know, because she is, at the end of the day, just a child, and it's easy to forget that as you're reading through this story. I do want to say that I did predict that Felisin would end up being the Shaikh reborn. As soon as she started having those nightmares, those visions of this like blood river, I was like, okay, I feel like I know where this is going. I feel like she's going to have her moment. And then we were talking about the Shaikh and being reborn. And I was like, it's totally going to be Felisin. So I'm really pleased that I managed to call that. And yes, and actually thinking back on it, the blood river that she was seeing, maybe that was a bit of a premonition for that horrendous battle that happens in Duiker's section with the chain of dogs, because the river ran red with blood, didn't it, in the end? So perhaps she was seeing a vision of that. I don't know. But yeah, this kind of idea that Felisin was just such a broken person. She basically lost her entire self. And then there were these visions that were coming, and it was the only thing that was kind of giving her any motivation to move forwards. And I feel like that was this idea of rebellion and this new purpose, and she really needed that because otherwise she had completely lost herself. So I feel like that's the only reason that kind of kept her going, and also why she was the perfect candidate for the Shaikh reborn, because she was like this empty vessel almost, and so was the perfect kind of person to choose, I feel. So yeah, I loved that she got chosen to be the Shaikh reborn, and I can't wait to see where her story goes. And then of course we have Heboric and Baudin. I liked the reveal that Baudin was a Talon and finding out a little bit about them. Heboric, I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty confused about all of his stuff. Like the moment when he finds that giant jade statue and he touches the hand that's like sticking out of the sand, and then that does something weird to his hat. He gets these kind of like invisible hands, and there's something to do with magic going on there. I don't really understand any of that stuff, but it's really cool. And then he's blind, but he can still somehow see. I don't know what's going on with Heboric, but like I say, Steven Erikson is able to like describe these really cool things, and it just gives me so much intrigue because I want to know what is going on. I want to know why is this jade statue there? Why does it have this effect on Heboric? What is going on? What is Heboric's tie to the god? And then of course we had that epic scene where is it Baudin touches Heboric's stump to his chest, I think it is, and then that unwittingly pulls the boar god into the mortal realm against his will, and he is mad about it. Oh my gosh, that whole scene was so scary and really shows kind of like the power of this god, and just the fact that he can be pulled into the mortal realm. What does that mean? I don't know. And then Heboric starts going strange from there. His tattoos get thicker and thicker, and yeah, I have so much intrigue about him as a character and what on earth is going on with him, but I have no clue, honestly, at this moment in time, what all of it means. So yeah, I'm very intrigued to find out more about all of that. Okay, so now we're going to jump to Duiker. I don't know how to pronounce his name, the historian, and his sort of storyline. So his perspective in the beginning was actually my least favourite. I found it quite slow reading his perspective, and I wasn't really that invested. I was much more interested in Felisin and that group of people, and also the Bridgeburners, because I was already familiar with those characters. But the second half of the book made me completely switch, and I became really, really invested in the historian as a character and also just his story as well. It was one of the most brutal things that I've ever read. The whole Chain of Dogs thing is just the most tragic thing that I've ever read, but I couldn't look away. So yeah, I really feel like Steven Erikson uses the whole Chain of Dogs to really, show how vile people can be during wartime. And that's on both sides of the conflict as well. During war, people do atrocious things to people and they have atrocious things done back to them. And everything is on the page here. There's no looking away from it. You just have to witness. And that is a big theme, I feel like, with the historian as a character, because his whole thing is that he is a historian. He is there to witness and document what is happening, and my goodness, is it so tragic and so heavy and so difficult to read. And I feel like a really sad moment as well was when Duiker kind of almost lost his purpose and his identity a little bit. So all throughout the whole book, he took his role as being a historian really seriously, and he was there, he was going to witness it no matter what. But then there was that moment where he was really, really understandably struggling with depression and just this loss of hope, this complete feeling of hopelessness, and he started to not even bother remembering people's names, and that was just such a sad moment. But my goodness, does he have some epic scenes towards the end. I particularly love the moment where he just throat kicks that guy who is the betrayer. He just completely throat kicks him, and that was just such an epic scene and felt so satisfactory to read about. But then of course he meets one of the most disturbing ends ever. Not only does he have to witness Cultane's absolutely horrific death and crucifixion. Ooh, that was so hard to read. He then has to watch, the people that he's been traveling with for such a long time on this perilous journey across the desert. He has to watch them all be crucified before then becoming crucified himself. And that was tough. That was really, really, really tough to read and very upsetting. And my goodness, what a end to the Chain of Dogs and to that whole thing. I have no words, honestly, as you can hear. I have no words to say for the ending that they all met. I felt so sad at the end of this book. But of course, we know in the Malazan series, dying isn't necessarily the end. And, Duiker, the historian, had that vial, that bottle thing, which he smashed. And I feel like his soul has gone into that or something. So I feel like this isn't the end of his story, and I think he's going to end up being brought back. Same with Cultane. So Cultane was such an epic character first up. He was such a great tactical leader, and I have so much intrigue about him as well, and the fact that he was a Wiccan and all of that stuff I find really, really interesting. So I'm looking forward to finding out more about him. I'm 100% certain that we're going to see more from him, because then we had the very end scene, was it the epilogue, I think? Right at the end of the book, we had that moment where there's that pregnant woman and she feels like her baby is empty and she's about to abort the child. And then there is this big swarm, this flight of ravens that comes, and then she feels the baby move. And obviously ravens are associated with Cultane, and so I'm pretty sure that his soul got put into the baby and he's going to be reborn again. So that is exciting. One criticism that I do want to talk about briefly about the whole Chain of Dogs segment is I feel like that was the section that had the most military fantasy elements to it, obviously. And military fantasy isn't normally my thing, and so I don't tend to enjoy battle scenes. But I will say that I find that Steven Erikson's battle and action scenes in particular are really difficult for me to follow, and I don't know if that's just a me thing, but I found it really difficult to understand what was going on quite a lot of times during some of these big epic battles. And I did have to go and look up some sort of recaps and things and use the wiki documents. So for example, I didn't pick up that the engineers, you know, the crazy engineers, I didn't pick up that they had made that ramp by burying themselves in the sand to help the army cross. I didn't realize that was going on. I was just very confused the entire time throughout that whole battle sequence. So I feel like, yeah, that is a criticism for me. I find that those scenes are really difficult to follow and to figure out what's going on. That being said, there were some really memorable action scenes and battle moments. In particular, I'm thinking of the battle at the river with all of the yellow butterflies. That was such a vivid scene for me, and again, it's a scene that's going to stick with me forever because it was just truly horrific. It was so brutal, and then you have all of these butterflies and insects swarming as well, and for some reason that just makes it seem even more brutal. I don't know if because butterflies are normally these delicate, beautiful creatures, and then seeing them in contrast with all the blood and the red river and the two of them, and then the butterflies like struggling in the water. It was just awful, and so that's going to stick with me forever as well. So yeah, there were some really memorable battle scenes as well, but in general I found them quite difficult to follow actually. Okay, so then we have Mappo and Icarium. So these two characters just have the best bromance ever. They are two of my favourite characters so far in the Malazan series. I really enjoyed all of their scenes. I loved their back and forth banter. And I love that we got a little bit of humour in their sections as well, particularly when they meet the crazy priest, what's his name? Pust. And he is just bananas and I loved it. So I really enjoyed having a little bit of lightness. I just loved the two, Icarium and Mappo together. But I also thought that their dynamic was super interesting because of course we have Icarium who has lost his memories, and Mappo knows why Icarium can't have his memories back, and so that puts him in this really difficult and vulnerable situation because he has travelled with Icarium for a really long time and he has grown to love and care for him deeply, but at the same time he knows that he can't give Icarium what he wants. He has to prevent him from getting answers because it's too dangerous for him to have those memories back. So the whole dynamic is super tense and super messy and super interesting. So I really loved all of that. I also liked that we found out later on that Mappo's hometown wasn't actually destroyed by Icarium. It was actually destroyed by these nameless ones that we still don't know much about. So I like the idea that maybe Mappo has been fed some lies and is being manipulated a little bit as well. So we don't have the full picture about what's going on. And we also, through their storyline, find out a bit more about the Duikers as well. And is it the soul taken? So these shapeshifter type creatures or people, and the path of hands, so the fact that they were following this path because they were trying to become ascendant. So we're starting to get a little bit more answers about some of those interesting concepts that we were thrown at in the first book as well. But yeah, I liked the ending of Mappo and Icarium's story in this book. I really liked that Mappo didn't give Icarium up to the Azath house, although I'm slightly nervous for what that means in terms of consequences and whether he's going to end up regretting that decision in the long run. I don't know, we shall see, but I have a feeling that their story is going to end in tragedy, and that makes me feel very sad because I just love the two of them so much. Okay, and then finally we have the Bridgeburners. So I'm not going to lie, I did actually struggle quite a lot to understand what the Bridgeburners were doing. Like, I understand they were taking Apsalar back home, but it seemed like they were getting sidetracked quite a lot, and I'm not really entirely sure why they ended up going to the Azath house. I think maybe because it can be used kind of as a gate to go back I don't know. I found it a little bit confusing following their storyline. But the most shocking moment, of course, was the reveal that the Emperor and Dancer didn't actually die, as we were led to believe. They actually became ascendant, and they became Cotillion and Shadow Throne, which means that Apsalar, or Sorry, was actually possessed by Dancer in the first book, in Gardens of the Moon. So that was a really big, shocking reveal. I didn't see it coming. I didn't think that the Emperor and Dancer were dead, because I knew that dead isn't dead in this series, so I knew that they probably were still around, but I didn't piece together that they were Cotillion and Shadow Throne. So that was a really big reveal, and starts to make things make sense. So looking back on Gardens of the Moon, it makes a little bit more sense kind of why they were getting involved so much and stuff. So that was really cool. But I still have questions. I have questions like, why was the flying monkey able to open the Azath house? I don't know. But yeah, the Azath house itself as well was really, really cool. I felt like it kind of had some sci-fi elements to it. We had this idea of this house, and then inside there was this floor with all of these tiles, but each tile was like representative of a different place, and the floor was like infinitely huge, which just makes me think of all of these different places, all these different like worlds or realities, and how many there are was just mind-boggling. And yeah, I loved that scene. I don't really know the relevance of all of it yet, but I don't know. Is it that the sort of different worlds are different warrens? Is that how the whole warren thing works? Are kind of like overlapping worlds? I don't have the answers. You don't have to tell me the answers in the comment section either if you've read this series, because I'm sure I will find out as I read on. But I really enjoyed that scene and the depiction of this Azath house, and I just thought it was so cool. Then, of course, we have Kalam, who is the assassin, and I did enjoy his perspective, actually, especially when he gets his little sidekick, the demon Apt. I loved her so much. I just love an animal companion. And she was just really cool. I love her so much. I love that she saved the children, because that's what Kalam would have wanted. And I love that she has this little child of her own now, this creepy demon child that just rides on her back. Like, that's really like scary, but also really cool. She just wants to be a mum. But anyway, I digress. Kalam, so he is obviously on his way to kill Felisin, and he literally delivers this magic book to Shaik to kickstart the whirlwind, because he believes that that will sort of weaken the Malazan Empire and will make it easier for him to get to Felisin. So the whole whirlwind is kind of his fault, really. So he has a lot on his shoulders for that decision. Anyway, what else can I talk about with Kalam's story? Oh, he obviously meets his sort of love interest character, Minala. Not gonna lie, I don't think Stephen Erikson writes like romance and relationships particularly well in his books. I never feel the chemistry between the characters. Like, there was a weird insta-lovey moment in the first book. Was it with Pran and Tattersail? Which I just didn't feel. And then in this book as well, we have the historian and his like lover friend. Random, didn't see any chemistry or sparks there. And then here we have Kalam and Minala. And again, I just didn't really feel their like chemistry. And so for that reason, it felt quite random when Minala decided to leave her family and go and follow Kalam. Like, I didn't really understand that choice that she made. But she was a really cool character though. She was really epic, and this really fierce fighter and this amazing horse rider. Like, she's really cool. And I quite liked that she ended up saving Kalam at the end when he's in that pickle. She turns up right at the right moment, and I liked that was kind of a flip of the whole hero saving the heroine thing. So it was nice to see that role reversal and having a female character coming to save the day at the end. So I did quite like that, although I don't quite know how she managed to get there in time. I don't quite it just feels a little bit convenient, the fact that she was there just at the right moment. But I really loved the scene with Kalam and him trying to get to Felisin, and he's like taking out so many claws, even though he has been stabbed. He was stabbed by Pearl and he was dropped into shark-infested waters, but he still managed to get out and then like kill like 20 or something claws, and the claws are like these really like impressive killers. So that just shows how great he is, and I really appreciate that we had that scene, because I feel like we've heard quite a lot that Kalam is this amazing assassin, he was the best, but we never actually really see him in action. So I like that we had that scene and it was like, okay, the dude is really cool, he knows what he's doing, he is a great fighter. So I that whole scene was really fun to read. But then we had that weird moment when he finally gets to Felisin and they have a chat, and then he decides to just leave. So that felt really anticlimactic after we followed him throughout a 1,000-page book on his journey to go and kill Felisin, and then he just decides to totally abandon it because she says some stuff to him. But I think there's more to it than that. I think the two of them were playing a game of chess. I think Kalam knew that Felisin wasn't in the room, because we find out that she was like talking through that dead body. There was a corpse in the room, it wasn't actually her, so she was somehow kind of maybe astro projecting her voice through the dead body. So I think Kalam knew that, so he wasn't going to get anywhere there, he wasn't going to be able to assassinate her because she wasn't in the room. But also I just feel like this isn't the end, I think, of Kalam and Felisin. I think we're going to get more, and I don't think he would that easily drop his mission. Okay, so my battery just died, which just goes to show that I've been talking for too long. So thank you so much for sticking with me and listening to me rambling about this book. I feel like my sort of general thoughts and feelings are that this is a really challenging book to read. It was so heavy on my heart, and for that reason I was only able to read 50 or so pages at a time and had to keep going to a different book to kind of take me out of it, because it is just so depressing and bleak. But at the same time it was really intriguing. It had some fantastic characters and just some scenes and some moments that will stick with me forever. It's not like anything that I've ever read in fantasy before, and for that reason I'm intrigued to continue on, although I will be reading this series very slowly to like avoid burnout. So yeah, that brings me to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. Do like this video if you did like it, because it really helps out my channel. And yeah, I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye.